Hi everyone, and welcome to 54 Youth Policy Cafe. My name is Samantha Luceno, and I'm seated here with a close friend of mine, Miss Beverly Musili. So I'll let her introduce herself and tell us a bit about what she does before, like I set the tone for the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So, my name is Beverly Musili. I'm a policy analyst in KIPPRA. Professionally, I'm an advocate, but in KIPPRA, I mainly do the policy research, and I'm mostly engaged in issues to do with governance, but also the partnership strategy for KIPPRA and resource mobilization. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's like a very comprehensive intro. But like I just want to like dive straight into like what our topic of discussion will be today. And just to mention, it's based off of like the rolling theme that we've been having around COVID-19 and some of the impacts it's had on like various sectors in the economy. And so, like, as we all know, like, COVID has had like serious ramifications, not just locally, but like internationally across countries and across sectors, really. In fact, just last week, we were having a conversation around the kind of impact it's had on the education sector and like the disruption of learning and I mean, like, various other aspects of the education sector. So, like, for me, like, when I think about this whole COVID-19 situation and like a potential solution for the challenges that we've been having, I think there needs to be like a multi-sectoral approach, and like there needs to be like various players coming in and like supporting and resolving that solution. So I know like one of the projects you're currently running at KIPPRA, and just to mention, she's young as well. She's in this bracket of ours. But like, yeah, one of the projects you're currently running at KIPPRA is like the Think Tank Summit and like the Think Tanks Forum broadly. And I think like think tanks, obviously being the technocrats that we have like in the country, have a very vital role in shaping what recovery looks like post-COVID. So like I just like want to start by asking you a very basic question, because like let's not assume that people know what we're talking about when we say think tanks.
Yes.
Like just tell us a bit about like first of all KIPPRA, but also tell us about think tanks, what are think tanks, and I think it would be interesting to understand what the Think Tanks Forum is as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Samantha. So, KIPPRA, that is Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis, we are a state corporation under the State Department for Planning, which is under Ministry of Treasury and Planning. So we mainly conduct public policy research and analysis to advise the government on current public policy issues. In addition to that, we also conduct capacity building for the government to equip the government and other government actors on matters to do with the public policy making process. So, in summary, think tanks are organizations that conduct research, but they use various tools to be able to advise the government or to be able to analyze certain public policy issues and provide policy proposals. And there are various tools that one could use. That could be either macroeconomic modeling, that could be simulations, that could be scenario analysis. So the think tanks are mainly the bridge between research and also the policymakers. So through the think tanks and the various tools and the experience and the knowledge that they have, they're able to better advise the government using the objective tools for research and analysis of how to solve some of the very critical public policy issues. Yes.
Yeah, and like I mean, like I'm an alum of KIPPRA as well.
Yes.
And I know like when I was in KIPPRA, then we constituted the Kenya Think Tanks Forum.
Yes.
So I think it would be interesting to also understand what that is and like what it looks like in terms of constitution of members.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So the Kenya Think Tanks Forum is basically an association of the think tanks in Kenya, the ones that are mainly involved in conducting research into various public policy issues, and that could be across very many sectors. That could be in health, it could be in education, it could be in technology, it could also be in legal issues. But the constitution is very diverse. But what the Kenya Think Tanks Forum sought to achieve was to bring all these various actors and institutions together to have one conversation around the various policy issues that as a country we're facing. So it basically provides a platform for exchange of information and exchange of ideas, because you could find that one organization is in possession of more information than the others, but another organization, for example, plays a more key role in advocacy and lobbying. So it was to bring these various organizations together and leverage on their strengths and also the information that they possess. So at the moment, we're about 55 members in the Kenya Think Tanks Forum. We as KIPPRA, we normally hope to coordinate the various think tanks. That is the main objective of the symposium, is to bring these different organizations together to discuss a critical public policy issue, but at the same platform, and exchange information and also leverage on the different experience and expertise of the different organizations. Yes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And if you think about the broader role of think tanks, obviously coordinating efforts and reducing that replication of responsibilities is very critical. Because I remember, even if you look through publications, you might find 10 think tanks doing very similar publications when they can easily just come together and sort of merge those efforts and have more of an impact with their publications. So I think that initiative at large makes sense. But now just sticking to the theme of what we've been discussing in recent weeks around the impact of COVID and the role of think tanks, because think tanks are there and we know that they're there. KIPPRA is a very common name in the policy space, but sometimes we're not able to attach the name to its impact or attach the name to its role in the larger picture of policy. So I think it would be interesting to understand now that we are obviously in the wake of organizing the Think Tank Summit, which I think is something that we'll discuss a bit later in this conversation. What do you envision that the role of think tanks collectively, you said you're about 55 members, is in the recovery from COVID, just mitigating socioeconomic impacts and basically advising government on policy? What do you see the role of think tanks as?
Yeah, I would say that think tanks are very strategically positioned in that the idea is that you have a pool of experts in that area that your think tank usually focuses on. And because of that expertise, which at times you can find is lacking in, for example, the government institutions, we are in a better position to leverage on that expertise within the sectors to be able to conduct especially independent, objective research using some technical tools for policy analysis. Through that, we are now better able to advise government from the standpoint that we're sitting. So I can give an example that, for example, KIPPRA did a study on behalf of the Council of Governors on the reengineering strategies for counties. And we did that for each and every county independently based on their strengths and their weaknesses. And we did that using our tools for policy research and policy analysis. So I think think tanks are in a very strategic position, mainly because of the information they possess, the highly technical and qualified staff that they have engaged, and also our objectivity and independence.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think something else that I like about the Think Tanks Forum, and even in this with COVID and recovery and everything, I think you play a very vital role in linking non-government players to government, because I think sometimes an external eye will see something that someone inside may not see.
Yes.
And so I think that's also a very critical role that it'll play. There's a lot of research from NGOs, INGOs around COVID. There's a lot of work around impact evaluation, globally even, that I think the government can definitely leverage on. When you think about think tanks. But I think maybe, and even just the basis or the motivation for this channel, 254 Youth Policy Cafes, I think there has been an unintentional seclusion of young people in policy discussions broadly. And I don't want to say that think tanks could be a solution to this or are a reason for this, but first of all, to what extent do you think think tanks have actually engaged young people? And what are some of the gaps that you still feel like could be addressed as we even approach the Think Tank Summit and we seek to actually disseminate some of this information that comes out of it?
Okay. I think it may vary from think tank to think tank. Also, how the think tank is structured. There are those that are maybe completely non-governmental. There are those that are government affiliated. There are those that have a hybrid composition. So some of those factors affect how the youth are engaged. So I would say it really varies from think tank to think tank, but generally, I think in the policy space, whether it's a think tank, whether it's government, the youth, I believe, has been excluded. And at times you can find it's not really it's not a deliberate action. Sometimes it's historical. If you look at how government has evolved, so you'll find that there are actually issues to do with succession management. So there's a high number of people who are almost at the retirement bracket, and a very small number of the youth that are engaged, especially at the higher levels. So I would say it really varies from think tank to think tank and organization to organization. But I think the most important is how do you bring the youth into the policy space to make sure that they have a table or a platform to be able to air their views and to also be given an opportunity to discuss some of these critical matters, not just at lower levels. Yeah, so giving the youth more high levels of responsibility within the policy space. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think to a very large extent, and I credit KIPPRA for this. I think KIPPRA has actually invested quite a lot in like building the capacity of the youth in like the policy making experience and like understanding the policy cycle and things like that. And I just think that a lot more think tanks need to do that. But also just like thinking about like even the research process, I think there has not in the past, at least even, and I mean, I'm a victim of this as well. I've organized policy dialogue forums and I've not been intentional to engage the youth. So I think it like stems all the way from stakeholder engagement and all the way through to dissemination. And I think like a major gap is like we want to engage youth at the dissemination point, so their interests and their issues don't get addressed in the like throughout the research process and even in the recommendations that you put forward. So I think would be like a win for the Think Tank Summit. I think how do we engage youth first of all throughout the process, but also how do we leverage existing opportunities in terms of technology and youth-specific interests to sort of like profile some of the things that we're like disseminating and putting out.
So I think first of all, it has to be intentional and deliberate that the think tank recognizes the input that the youth could have. And from there, I mean, there's so many youth groups that we have. So it's a matter of, it's for the think tank to think of how to deliberately engage those organizations, those platforms for the youth, make sure that they have a seat at the table, make sure that you have provided a slot for them to make presentations, to exchange with the decision makers and also the policy makers, make sure they're part of any stakeholder engagement forums, and that is at all stages of the research making process, not just at the end, but making sure that their views have been incorporated right from whether it's data collection, report writing, or now the final dissemination. But making sure that you have created a space for them to be able to participate. The most important is giving them the opportunity to do so. If you do not give them the opportunity to do so, then exactly. There's not much you can do.
So, Beverly, I want you to tell us about the Think Tank Summit. So, it's supposed to happen on the 15th of this month. So, if you could tell us a bit about that, the motivation behind it, the theme for this year, and maybe some of the objectives of the summit, and probably who we should expect to see at the summit.
Okay, so the theme for the 2021 Kenya Think Tanks Symposium is Building Back Better, the role of Kenyan think tanks in supporting recovery from COVID-19. So this is a follow-up of the inaugural symposium that we had in 2019. the main objective, as you have known, that the Kenyan economy has seriously suffered from very negative socioeconomic effects from COVID-19. So the main objective is, how do we rebuild? How do we revive our economy? How do we recover from the devastating effects that COVID has had on our economy? So the main objectives is to create a platform for think tanks and also the policymakers, decision makers, to be able to exchange ideas of how to now tackle this issue of the rebuilding and revival of the Kenyan economy. Then also to empower, how do we give think tanks very practical proposals to empower them to evolve in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic into more agile institutions. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm sure you have seen that a lot of the research processes have really been affected.
Yeah.
Because, for example, data collection, you're not able to go out into the field to collect the kind of data that you require. And think tanks have really been affected in that way. So it's, how do we empower think tanks to be able to also restructure, re-engineer their processes in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think that think tanks have like suffered from in the past, or rather we are learning now that they suffered from it, is a lack of integration of technology into their systems. Because like I remember, like, I mean, data collection processes were manual, more or less, like with the exception of like certain data collection tools. Dissemination processes were extremely manual and mainstream.
Yes.
It was, let's organize a forum, call 1, 2, 3, let's sit down at Hilton, let's discuss. So I think that has really been tested. So I think it would be very interesting to see how people are now adapting, like in the wake of COVID, and like, I mean, like it's a shock to like everyone. Like there's been like an overall shift. But like I think the sub theme that you have as well around basically making your research count, or having an impact in this space of COVID. How do you as think tanks position yourselves to like basically impact policy, and like speak to decision makers and things like that?
The theme has 4 different sub themes, and the way we develop those sub themes is that if you look at think tanks, we have general functions that we perform. So there are some think tanks that are stronger in some functions, whereas there are others that are stronger in other functions, and that could include conducting research. There are others that are very strong in aspects of lobbying and advocacy. There are some that are very strong in aspects to do with capacity building, training, and communication. There are others that are very strong in policy drafting or policy formulation. So now the sub-themes are mainly focused on that, how the functions of the think tanks have been affected by COVID-19, and also how the think tanks need to re-engineer the structures internally to make sure that those functions are still able to carry on, even in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. So for me, it's also an opportunity for us to discuss the really the opportunities that COVID has created, even for think tanks, to be able to now take a seat back, look at how they've been conducting their processes, and think of how to make them more responsive, make them more user-friendly, make them more palatable to the public. And so the 4 sub-themes that we have is conducting policy research in times of crisis, then communication, lobbying, and advocacy, then also on the reform process in public policy making and lawmaking process, and also on the aspect of capacity building and knowledge management. So if you look at these 4 different areas, there have been very significant shocks that have affected these functions of think tanks. So it's just to provide an opportunity for the think tanks to exchange information, exchange their own experiences, best practices, how they've been able to survive, how they've been able to re-engineer their processes, how maybe they've been able to seek for alternative ways of carrying out the activities. Yes.
First of all, thank you for engaging us like throughout the planning process and like obviously in the implementation of the summit. I think it would be interesting to know what players that you're engaging, like who should we expect to see on the program, who should we expect to see in attendance, Like, yeah, if you could tell us a bit about that as well.
Okay, yes. So we have quite a number of participants. So we've tried to target the various sectors because the idea was to have a very multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral approach, which I think even COVID requires in terms of tackling and addressing some of the issues that COVID-19 has brought up. So we have representatives from that is private sector, from government, and also the non-governmental organizations. So some of the key ones which I can attest to are, for example, the Kenya Agricultural Livestock Research Organization, that's KALRO, which is very instrumental in terms of conducting research for agriculture. Also, they have a very key function in capacity building. We also have representatives from the Center for Parliamentary Studies and Training, which also play a very key role in the policymaking and the legislative process. We also have representatives from that is in terms of the non-governmental space, we have from ID Insight, which is an organization that mainly deals with data and conducting research based on data. We also have from Busara Center for Behavioral Economics, which is one of the organizations that really focuses on evidence-based policy research and analysis. We have on Think Tanks, which is also an organization that also conducts policy research and analysis. We have now, in terms of the different subthemes, we have players from, for example, the Institute for Social Accountability, that's TISA. We have from Transparency International, we have from Katiba Institute. So we've tried to really bring different players on board. That is the government, public sector, non-governmental organizations, because it's important to have a very multi-sectoral, dynamic discussion around these issues. Yes.
Yeah. So lastly, Beverly, you can tell us, like, how do you plug into a conversation? How do you register? Like, where should we get that information? Like, how do we join the conversation?
Yes, so we have the details for the event on our KIPPRA website, also our KIPPRA social media handles on Twitter and LinkedIn, and also the different organizations that we have partnered with. We'll also be sharing those details on their different handles.
Thank you so much, Beverly, for joining us today and having this conversation with us. I think just as young people generally, I think it's very important that we begin to engage with such organizations that are having discussions that we must be part of. As you've seen, like even with COVID-19, the larger part of the burden has been felt by young people. I mean, like if you think about the industries that have been affected in terms of losing jobs, I think a lot of them were dominated by young people. So I feel like we have actually carried the burden of COVID-19 to a large extent. So I think it's very important that we join in such conversations so that we're able to channel some of our concerns, channel some of our recommendations. Like just basically in the spirit of just being part of the conversation at large. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for engaging us in the process. And that said, please do make sure to join into the Think Tank Summit on the 15th. More details of that will be shared on our website and our social media platforms.